Buddy, welcome. Happy Sunday. We're so happy to see you. We are so happy to have with us Dr. Gregory Watson. The subject today is a pretty important one. It's going to be self-knowledge is the beginning of holistic education. So, as we are talking about this subject, we want to introduce our speaker, Dr. Watson. He entered the doctoral program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in 1987, and he received a master's degree in education, acquired under the supervision of Dr. Daniel Jordan, founder of the Center for the Study of Human Potential at the University of Massachusetts. For those who don't know Dr. Dan Jordan, we do have some videos that are posted online. Jeremiah's channel has some, and we've posted some under Clearwater Baha'is. Dr. Jordan was definitely a luminary in the field of education. His studies in the ANISA model focused on psychological learning processes and domain-related competencies, which are similar to what Professor Howard Gardner of Harvard University later referred to as multiple intelligences. At Harvard, Watson obtained a second master's in education in a context of international development, with a dual emphasis on administration and psychological development. In that study, Watson designed and trained 70 families to teach toddlers to read at second grade level before starting school, believing that we can piggyback literacy on the back of critical period in development of the brain for each child at early language acquisition from birth to age 3. He presented this to the Association for Baha'i Studies in 1989, and you can find these links, actually, the links to see these studies on clearwaterbaha'is.org. You are all welcome, please, to take a look at the biography for Dr. Gregory Watson. With that being said, during his time at Harvard, Dr. Watson served for several years as a research fellow at the Harvard Institute for Development and as a consultant to the Conflict Management Group. And it's born out of the program of negotiation at the Harvard Law School. So on loan from Harvard, he worked as a consultant to the U.S. Department of Education in Washington for summer terms, and as a grant reader for the Native Alaskan program and the Migrant Education Even Start program. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to just explain one thing. If you all want to know what his doctoral thesis is, Watson combined psychology with social policy, developing a systems model for world citizenship education, seeing global citizenship as the moral ethic of global competency. For these types of items to learn more, we welcome you, please, to go to the website that we've listed on clearwaterbaha'is.org. And if you go to watsongregory.homestead.com, you can find a wealth of information posted on this website, watsongregory.homestead.com. So we're going to meditate today on central Baha'i themes and quotes regarding this personal transformation and building civilization on the basis of this holistic education model. So without much further ado, Dr. Watson, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I have at the last minute been honored with this invitation, and unfortunately a bit compromised by a medical emergency in our family, so I have decided to use a prior PowerPoint rather than actually putting together the one that I had hoped would match the theme that I've described in the title that was published yesterday. But he's changed the title to this PowerPoint presentation I have now. And I'm going to probably talk as much as I'll share some slides and give you some ideas in preparation for what possibly could be a later presentation. We have this idea in the Baha'i writings that before you can begin to learn about the world and everything else, you should know something about yourself. And I'm going to use this particular set of slides that I have here as some talking points. And it's not advancing. Albert Einstein said that curiosity contemplates the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure of reality. And it's enough if one tries merely to comprehend something of this every day. And so I want us to just pause for a moment to reflect on the grandeur of creation. If we talk about self-knowledge, we have to consider the whole of our existence and our context within the grandeur of creation, and what our interaction and responsibility is in relationship to the whole. So, of course, we are awestruck with the grandeur of creation. And we notice that within this great design, we find all kinds of principles that are universal. And a lot of them are just in our own experience first, and then we begin to map that on top of what we can observe in nature. Einstein said, "We never lose a holy curiosity, and it's a miracle that modern education has not entirely strangled holy curiosity." So if we talk about traditional education, very little knowledge is given of the self. And it's a little like trying to go out to build some great architectural structure without a plan, or to try to operate some heavy equipment without an operating manual. We go into education without understanding much about how our brain works or how learning takes place. And so part of what I wanted to do is, oh, part of my screen is missing. How do I get rid of this bar at the bottom? Let's see. What can I do with it?
So there's a little arrow on the bar that will allow you to send it upwards.
Well, let's see. No, I just want to get rid of this bar, but it's okay. I'll work with it. I see there's something. Send it upwards. Okay. But then it covers the top of my slides. Okay. It's one way or the other. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, so we see the screen in its entirety. That's just the way that the application works. So even though it's a distraction to you, it's not distracting any of us.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Well, I was making the point that for any job, you must perfect the instrument with which you're attempting to do that job. And we go into education without understanding very much about our brain or how learning takes place. So what partly I've been involved with is trying to understand science of learning. And that's what the ANISA model is about, that was referred to in the introduction, to try to attempt to build a science of education or create a prototypical example of what a science of education might be. And the other is to look at the recent brain research, which has to do with how we perceive the world, how learning takes place, and how so much of it is unconscious. Now, this really led me to be very interested in what we could do to mitigate the effect of unconscious, subconscious bias and racism that runs our lives without us knowing much about it. And so what some of the work that's being done that's publicly available through PBS videos and the like, I invite you to examine, like the work of David Eagleman, for example, on PBS. And one of the main features in this recent brain research is that we can understand how it's necessary for most of our thinking processes, even our decisions, to take place subconsciously. Now, you see these people here at the grocery store. I'm going to use this at our supermarket as an illustration of another point besides the one that's being made here at this slide. If scientists have discovered that if you delete certain sections of the emotional part of your brain, say, for example, part of the amygdala, or someone's lost this through cancer or an injury, and the emotional function described by Professor Damasio is not functioning well, you can't even make a simple decision at the grocery store, like which toothpaste to buy. So this is extremely not just frustrating to the individual, but revealing to scientists to realize that so much of this holistic emotional part of the brain is involved in every little decision we make. And unfortunately, it's very much tied up with our bias. I'll tell you a story about really a tragedy. As you know, after the George Floyd murder, there was a huge concern and a lot of publicity around racial profiling, and unconscious bias came into the conversation numerous ways. And in particular, in these cities, Eric Adams, who's now mayor of New York, was a police officer once, interviewed by Anderson Cooper, had to express his own discovery of his own racism against his own race. And the story I want to tell you is by Dr. Eberhardt, which illustrates the same point. Dr. Eberhardt at Stanford University was commissioned by the government not long after this George Floyd incident. Her work is on bias and racism at Stanford, and she has a book out I recommend to you called Biased. In this book, she tells the story of her 5-year-old child accompanying her on an airline where they were seated getting ready to take off, and the child, who was 5-year-old son, incidentally, she's African American, the child looks around the plane and says, "That man over there looks like Daddy." And she looks at him and says to herself, "Well, no, he doesn't look like Daddy." hairstyle is different. It's a different size and weight. Even his skin color is slightly different. Also, she's realizing the son is picking him out because he's African American. And so she starts to ask him why he would say that, given, of course, that there were so many physical differences among them. Before she could, the child said, "I hope he doesn't rob the plane." Now, this was a great shock to her, because she's raised this child in a very enlightened worldview and one of integration and not highlighting any kinds of prejudice. And yet somehow this child had become infected with it. And so what we can learn from this is that racism, prejudice, is given to us by our culture, and even our brain has preference for our own phenotype, which some people thought was a genetic inheritance of racism, but it's actually more a familiarity thing. Children by 3 months will prefer pictures of people of their own race. So there's a huge obstacle in the way of people being able to see oneness and understand the wholeness and singleness of the human race. My work has been involved with an attempt to find ways to fix this unconscious bias. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. Let's go through the rest of these slides first. It's moving very slowly. Not quite sure why it isn't advancing.
Please make sure that you actually are clicked on the Zoom application so that it's activated. Sorry, the PowerPoint. You got to be on the PowerPoint presentation. There you go. Yep. Try the next arrow, which is to the left, further to the left, over to the left more. Keep going. Keep going. A few more. Nope, you're on Zoom. So if you hit escape out of that function, and then keep going over one more. There you go. That's there.
Ah. Okay, so how can we approach this scientifically and overcome this kind of a barrier that's affecting us all subconsciously? Gardner had a complaint, Gardner, who was mentioned in the intro, that there's not yet a science of education. And this was echoing Piaget's complaint that there's no science of education. Gardner had come up with this multiple intelligence theory, began looking at the whole child, at least the multiple dimensions of intelligence within a child. And many of you, of course, will be familiar with that. It was a synthesis of the prior work of J.P. Guilford, who was president of the American Psychological Association. But Gardner says it was not a model for educational practice, not even a science of education. So, well, I moved my thing around here, and the way it's operating is quite different.
So what happens is when you activate the Zoom application, it deselects its ability to manipulate the PowerPoint presentation. So you always have to, when you want to go back and change to another slide or look specifically on the PowerPoint, you have to go back to the PowerPoint and make sure it's active by clicking on it.
Yes, but I'm not getting a pop-up with those arrows on it anymore. It's not coming up from the bottom of the screen. never had this problem in presenting PowerPoints previously. Maybe it's the way it's being shared.
That could be possible. If you can't get the Zoom to activate, I mean the PowerPoint to activate again, then go ahead and just stop the screen share and reinitiate it.
Well, here we go. It suddenly popped up. So surveys indicate that teachers want knowledge of human development and theories based on this knowledge with which to inform their educational practice, but this is void or pretty much vacant in terms of daily practice. That was my experience as well as the research. I taught 7th grade science for a while. Now, this is just an example of one thing that could be included inside holistic education, or what might be referred to as activating the whole child's potential. It would have to be a part of what I conceptualize as oneness education, partly as the element in helping children understand what a human being is. And the idea there is simply that if a child understands who he is first as a human being and what the reality of being human is from some kind of scientific perspective mainly, and then there's a chance that he will be able to see this same reality in others. And the greatest advantage, or the greatest evidence for the possibility that this can happen, is the way vision works. For example, in racial profiling, it comes up really in an obvious way. When you see someone, or anything actually, in your environment, what you're seeing is a part of a model that's being built in your brain to interpret what's the data stream from your retina, your eyes. And it turns out that 6 times as much information is coming in to your interpretation, or the visual center of your brain, from your past, from your memories, your associations, your opinions, your previous interpretations, your maps. More than 6 times as much information is being used to interpret what you're seeing in that data stream. So you're not really seeing that person, you're seeing your experience of that person. And if it's informed by racism or misinformation about a particular race, or you've got even propaganda or prejudice being proliferated through the culture, all of that comes into play. And I won't go into how that happens with racial profiling of someone in your own race, but that's a very curious and interesting aspect of it. When you look at the way culture is the dominant aspect in creating this, you can say that culture is dictatorial, and we are at its mercy. And until you understand how it's working to do this, you're never going to be liberated from it. But I said that this was good news as well as bad news, because the idea that, or the understanding from science, that this unconscious bias is mediated by all of this prior experience and knowledge that you have, and opinions, false information. If it's dominated by that, this wrong information, all we would need to do to get rid of it is prepare children from very early age, beginning before they're 5 years old, when the full personality is developed by age 5. Even Abdu'l-Baha said that before the scientists did, by the way. If we could provide this kind of right information, the proper education, as Baha'u'llah would refer to it, says the human being has been deprived of a proper education. It says man is the supreme talisman, but lack of a proper education hath deprived him of what he doth inherently possess. So the lack of a proper education, you have to ask the question, what is a proper education? And I'm suggesting it just has to be based on the truth and the reality of the human being. We used to say the reality of man. Now we say the reality of mankind. Can't even say the reality of mankind. We say the reality of humankind to avoid our gender bias. And if the science of reality is what's taught, then the right information will be called to the surface inside your perception of things. So this suggests that we have to change our conception of oneness into a perception of oneness, so that it's automatic, and so that the unconscious bias actually serves us rather than debilitates us. Now, in a school setting, or even a preschool setting, or some kind of formalized education program, you would be able to control the content and the process. It's really going to be difficult because so much of the influence in a child is coming from the parent. The parent is the greatest teacher the child will ever have, whether they're teaching the right information, wrong information. All the prejudices are transmitted right there from the home. So to get people to sign on board to this, if it's contrary to their current value system and ideology, it would be almost impossible. So that's why I characterized it as something that the nations might adopt after some catastrophic result from the us and them mentality, which has created all the wars for the last millennia. So back to the idea of what even the content from science would be outside the notion of transforming this worldview and giving child access to their knowledge of a human being. Oh my goodness. I have a problem with my PC. If you'll hold on one moment, please.
While we're dealing with that, hopefully everyone has been able to connect with the ANISA model. The ANISA model was introduced several years ago as a way to educate children. And ANISA is modeled after the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life is a sacred religious symbol, and it means a lot of things to many cultures. So the Tree of Life being so important, being the symbol for this educational model, something to contemplate indeed. Some places physically have a tree called the Tree of Life actually too.
back. The battery was about to run down and shut us off. So
I'm glad we could get plugged in. Thank you very much.
yeah, it's plugged in now. Very good. So this is a chart that I developed initially based on the ANISA model because it was attempting to look at the whole child. And we see these various potentialities in the psychological potentialities in the areas of psychomotor development, perceptual development, cognitive development, affective or emotional, volitional, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. Having trouble getting this slide to advance again. And these potentialities all arise inside the child's interaction with the environment. And we can define these environments as the physical environment, the human environment, the unknown environment and unknowables, and the environment of the self. And all of these realities begin to develop through interaction with the environment. And in each one of these, there's a corresponding set of ideas of what the method is or the process of interaction is. You interact with these domains, say, for example, in the physical environment, you're interacting with science and technology, the language, the symbol system is math, material environment, and you develop a competency of what we might call technological competency, or the ability to operate within the physical environment in the simplest ways to the most complex. The human environment assimilates knowledge that we categorized in the social sciences, using a language as the symbol system, forming social values and moral competencies. The category of philosophy, religion, and aesthetics encompasses the unknowns and unknowables, and generally is expressed in the arts in ways that transcend language and still provide meaning system. The values developed there are philosophical and religious values. And you might say the competencies are a kind of spiritual competency, wherein you developed virtues, essentially, and an attitude towards life that's giving you a higher level of health, mental, emotional health. All the time that this is occurring in these other environments, you're always within the environment of yourself. And this particular environment is never considered really in traditional education. The values that arise, we do think of, however, as personality or personal identity or personal reality, which involves your self-perception, your self-conception, self-affect, and all of that combined. And then the competency that arises out of that is where you combine all these other aspects into a sense of self that enables you to continue to actualize your potential, not only in these domains, but within the psychology of yourself. So that was kind of an overview of trying to put everything into one simple chart. And as you know, human being is the most complex reality we know of in existence. And so it's nothing simple about it. I want to, let's see what the next slide says. Oh, yeah. The focus was not just learning what to learn, but learning how to learn in the ANISA model. So these are ways in which different domains, this was part of my doctoral dissertation, can reinforce each other as a system if you have all of them working together to create moral competency. You have to use science to inform the individual concerning what a human being is in terms of his evolution, his history, the organization of societies, not only the history of his successes, but the histories of wars and what the basis for those conflicts were. We have enlightened kinds of courses on multicultural education. All of these, in some sense, have to presuppose each other, and so that you would see that if you left any of them out, you could not develop as a moral human being. You wouldn't, at least you wouldn't have a system that attempted to do so. Children might get a lot of this outside of school from parents and the influence of other individuals. The idea of oneness as a concept is deceptively simple in popular discourse, and we think of it as something that we actually know and understand. But I posit or present the idea to you that because we are living inside, from a Baha'i perspective, 1,000-year dispensation, which has the primary and central principle of raising the consciousness of oneness, that we probably don't know a lot about it yet, given that it's going to be that central principle and theme for 1,000 years. So why or how shall we consider it complex? What would it mean to examine it as a complexity and begin to understand what it would take to bring about that kind of consciousness? There is this idea that world citizenship education will be central to the process, but will not really arise until the nations become committed to think that way. And in the writings suggesting that after some great catastrophe, that this stage in human social evolution will begin, this world citizenship, sense of world citizenship. World citizenship is a sense of responsibility for not only yourself, but taking care of the planet, your society, and everyone else around you. And that involves a sense of connectedness, perception of interdependency, and oneness, which we don't yet have. The stages of achieving world peace are outlined in the Baha'i writings, in my understanding, as follows: that first of all, if you want a world civilization, it has to be established, or we'll reverse engineer this. It has to be based on peace among the nations, and you can't have peace without unity. The great quote, famous quote of the Hololives, that the world's security and peace are unattainable unless and until its unity is first established. But unity is something you have to build. Of course, we are all in some ways so interdependent. There is an inherent unity, but it's not. It's very dysfunctional because there's competitiveness and selfishness, and one group trying to dominate the other, and there's oppression and war, and of course all these other problems: jingoism, xenophobia, racism. So if you're going to have a world unity that you build, everyone would have to be committed to it out of some sense of responsibility, which is what I called world citizenship. Citizens have always been responsible for their communities, and if your community is, your family, you have a unity in your family, and if you widen that circle of unity to include your neighbors, then you can have unity at that level. Another level would be your city, your state, and this is actually parallel with the evolution and development of civilization. Human beings have become united through these levels, from progress from family to tribe and city, state, and nations. And then we have this final level of unity among the nations that we must achieve before we can have world peace. And that's only going to happen when everyone sees is in their self-interest. So it will perhaps come as a result of some calamitous changes where we see that the current systems, models, paradigms, and definitions of relationships, policies don't work because there's a lack of concern for the common weal or common good. If we back away from this world citizenship, the level that's prerequisite to that, we are again at the level of needing to perceive our oneness. So everyone has, the screen has changed. Everyone has some sense of it, but the greatest challenge to everyone, of course, is to overcome their own selfish desires and self-serving nature. There's a passage in the Baha'i writings where the highest, this borders on the mystical, how you can affect change in your own life and how you can become in tune with your true self involves a certain amount of obedience to the purpose for your life, which you have to discover something. And Baha'u'llah says in his most mystical work that if you obey me, I will make you like unto myself. I say, be, and it is. And thou shalt say, be, and it shall be. Well, this it's easy to misunderstand, which is what we mostly do about everything initially. And the more we look at it, the more nuanced it becomes. But if we're talking about obey me, obedience, we do have some clues in the writings about what that could mean. And Abdu'l-Baha says there are three kinds of obedience. The first level of obedience is outward obedience, which is like you obey the laws and you stop at the red light when you're out driving your car. And same would apply to being outwardly obedient to the laws of religion or the spiritual principles about how to guide your life that are given through the revelation of the Word of God. And the second level of obedience is inner or inward obedience. This is where you don't have to be monitored. You don't have to worry about someone policing you. And you don't need anybody watching you stop at the red light. You would do it out of respect for the law itself. That, of course, raises all sorts of strange questions. Would you stop at a light at 3 o'clock in the morning? But if you're thinking that you're actually obedient only if you observe these principles outwardly for show or in ways that are observable to others, then you haven't mastered your inner self. And the most interesting one is the third one, where the third level of obedience is purity of thought. And this one really surprised me, shocked me. If you're to reach a point where you can actually say be and it shall be in terms of your destiny, your goals in life, self-actualization, you would somehow have to come into conformity with this obedience through your thought and purity of thought. The first hidden word is purify. My first commandment is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. And purity of thought is a little elusive. If you don't have it, you don't yet know what it is. And I think that it's an evolutionary awakening kind of process that none of us have yet seen. And it's interesting, it's the first hidden word and my first counsel, he says, and yet it's the lifelong objective, that maybe it's the thing you hope you can achieve some degree of before you pass to the next world. Maybe it's the way to obtain your wings to the highest level of the next world. But purity of thought involves monitoring yourself. You know, Bill Sears, our wonderful, kind, loving hand of the cause, used to quote Abdu'l-Baha frequently about saying, if a thought enters your mind of war, you should oppose it with a thought of peace. If a thought of hate enters your mind, you should oppose it with a thought of love. And I think all of us are plagued with the kinds of thoughts that we don't really wish we had. And this gets back to the problem of the influence of the culture and the subconscious and how things surface from your subconscious into your mind. Someone once asked Abdu'l-Baha, what is the source of evil thoughts in the minds of those who do not wish to entertain them? And he said, and this is a Pilgrim's Note, which are considered non-authenticated sources of like the texts, but they're not suppressed, and they can be encouraged to be used if we understand them in that context. But so they're not authoritative statements, but he said that they are the thoughts of others. Now, there are two ways I interpret that possibility. There's either some metaphysical reality going on where we have a collective consciousness and other people's thoughts are filtering into our minds all the time because we're so connected on this higher plane of metaphysical consciousness, where all of consciousness is part of a great mind, or our shared morphogenetic mind of the species. If that's taking place, we're kind of a victim of the worst elements of all of us at times, where any kind of thought can come into your mind. The other aspect is not so metaphysical, which is just that it has seeped into our subconscious through the culture. It happens because we watch stupid stuff on television or movies that aren't good for us spiritually, or we engage in conversations, or we listen to other people's backbiting at work, and all kinds of things come into us from the culture that are unhealthy and will suddenly pop into your mind at a given moment, maybe triggered by something you're experiencing or something you see, and you don't really wish they were there. Abdu'l-Baha said, when he was asked, how do you get rid of these kinds of things when you don't wish to entertain them? And this was why he was saying you have to be vigilant enough to oppose them with the truth. And I think this is the part of adult education, transformative education, that all of us take on individually for ourselves as adults, that children won't have to deal with if they have the right formative education. So there's two kinds of education: formative education and transformative education. And formative education sort of is a hedge against all this pain and suffering that we have to go through to overcome the bad stuff that we've inherited from the culture, if we do formative education correctly. I'm suggesting. So if there's a thought of hate, you oppose it with a thought of love. If there's a thought of some perversion or promiscuity or something, then you would have to, what I call, shine the light of God, the reality of reality, shine the purpose and reality of man on the subject. We could deal with sexuality, for example. How women, for example, have been made sex objects. A man might be attracted to a woman not because of her personality or her spiritual dimensions or her intelligence and spiritual qualities like her virtues, but just physically. And that's an element or an aspect of our animal nature, animal body. But we have evolved enough to try to control these impulses. And at the same time, I think that there's this mental yoga that we can all go through in relationship to this injunction to oppose the aberration or the promiscuity or the perversions that are in our subconscious. And one way, it's a very simple example, is almost like the Hippocratic Oath of viewing, for example, a man would view a woman's body just as the wonder and the beauty of God's creation. Even in a Baha'i prayer, there's gratitude for, as an infant, receiving 2 fountains of milk. And if, for example, you see this anatomy in terms of God's purpose for man or human, then you take this evil thought or pernicious thought, and you take it that's in one category in your brain and you put it in the right category. You reframe it such that it loses its power, because now it's seen in its proper light and light has a way of erasing darkness. So all of this idea of a science of education would be to base things in a science of reality or the truth, and to discern these kinds of differences and also see what kinds of pernicious influence run our lives if we don't get over it early in our formative education. We're going to have to deal with it later. I have some really interesting slides around how this kinds of uh, dialogue takes place between a teacher and a student at early age that's similar or parallel to what we can do as adults with what's referred to as presuppositional dialogue. It's an element of what's called transformative education. It was developed at Columbia University's pioneered by Jack Mesereau. And this is concerning the rehabilitation of prejudice. And when I say prejudice, I'm talking about not just racial prejudice, that kind of thing. The idea I gave you about sexism or objectifying women, turning a human being, a person, into a sex object, for example. The understanding of our underlying, not just motivations, but our theories and presuppositions is really important. Even in conversation, when we consult in our assemblies or even in our personal lives, we have these conversations with people where we fail to define the premises or the presuppositions of the conversation. And so people are operating out of a different set of presuppositions. And it's often humorous to discover halfway through the conversation that two people in the same conversation were operating with a different premise about even the intention or the purpose of the conversation. So what I'm suggesting is that part of human development and becoming your true self is this higher level of scrutiny or self-examination, which we can begin to leverage with these new discoveries in psychology and in the brain sciences about how bias works and about how prejudice works and how it actually runs and ruins our lives and is bringing us to the brink of international catastrophe and has brought us for centuries into the wars, simply based on misperception of the reality of human being. The idea even that there are different races or different peoples and we aren't sharing a common set of values and common future. Right now, of course, the planet has shrunk to the extent that we can all begin to perceive that we do have a common future, common interests and values for our very survival. The environment is particularly important. In one of the slide shows that I'll present in subsequent presentation, if I'm so honored to present again, I would share a list of all the critical major problems facing humanity that can only be solved at the global scale by all the nations cooperating together. And it's really quite daunting how evident this is. And our most recent dramatic revelations of this, of course, were COVID-19 and other environmental crises that we've had with respect to the environment. I have so much I wish I could share with you. I think it requires some kind of shock treatment, something to wake us up to how bad things are. I had at one point thought I would call this talk Wake Up America and sort of honoring Bill Sears. He had a talk called Wake Up America about recognizing the Baha'i revelation had come to the planet. But this would kind of be a talk on how the house is on fire. Everybody's walking around like things are normal, but we're living in an existential crisis under several existential threats. And if we believe that God has a plan for our lives and a way to save us from ourselves, we better start applying some of the principles that are required to do so. You know, the essential central Baha'i premise is that the ruler of the universe, this great mind, the intelligence that has designed and is guiding all the laws and forces of nature, creating the supernovas, births of stars, keeping planets in their orbits, causing all the biological processes that keep your body alive to continue and sustain us. All of these wondrous things in which we found ourselves just being born into this matrix, that this great mind and intelligence, which I'll use Einstein's definition really quickly. I think it's wonderful. Someone asked him what his idea of God was, and he said that the most important emotional experience you can have with emotional intelligence is the sensation of the mystical and the mysterious. You think about it right now, for example, we are on a little speck of dust, a little ball, water and earth, floating in a vast, vast ocean of nothingness. And the cosmos is so grand, so big, we can't even perceive it. And it's a revelation to look at the stars and imagine how wondrous the Creator is to have created all this. And Einstein said this mystical sense is the mother of all true science. He said, he who can no longer stand wrapped in awe, and he who can no longer wonder, and with this holy curiosity, is as good as dead. Then he says, my conviction of the presence of a superior reasoning power, which reveals itself in the incomparable universe, forms my idea of God. And so these are many scientists who are inspired with this great intelligence and understanding that there's reasoning, purpose, and order, and laws and principles that are inviolable and are guiding everything, and behind which there's no sense of accident or randomness, in the sense that ultimately it's all within some grand scheme of things. And we're part of that. And yet the scientists may fail to have any kind of a personal relationship to God. Some do, but it's not required to think of God the way that theists and people of religion do in order to be a scientist who believes in God. Because it's a God that in some ways it's regarded as impersonal. The idea of religion, of course, is that God speaks to man, and that once in about 1,000 years, some human being on this planet is born with a special purpose as a unique kind of being, and that he brings the revelation, or that he speaks for God, or he becomes the mouthpiece of God, or the instrument of revelation, and provides guidance, laws and principles and teachings to help us find our way through this wilderness of unknown and scary possibilities of our own extinction. Human being is the only creature who knows he's going to die. I mean, you might have an animal have some sense of imminent death if they're in a fearful or in a threatening hostile environment. They have some instinct about their own demise. But human beings the only one that thinks ahead of his own death, may even prepare for it, anticipate it, wonder if it's the finality, and contemplates the possibility of some continuance beyond the grave. And this becomes part of the heart of religion and part of the revelation. Of course, every religion has dealt with it somewhat differently according to the needs of the peoples and the times in which they were revealed, what it would mean to be born into a higher level of consciousness, or whether you enter another realm referred to as heaven without your body, you are able to continue to exist in some sort of spiritual or mental state. So if God speaks to man and brings a revelation and provides teachings and principles by which to guide ourselves, and if they're required in order for us to survive, we should probably consciously be attending to them, finding out what they are, and live our lives accordingly. The sort of converse of this, I mean, it's corollary, I should say, is that if you look at what we know about the universe, about 15 billion years of cosmic evolution, beginning with the Big Bang and the coalescing into these gaseous amalgamations and eventual stars, and the birth of life. You can't imagine, or I can't, that all of this huge effort to bring existence as we know it today into being, and to have the level of consciousness of it, man being consciousness aware of itself, or the way for the universe to know itself, you wouldn't think that God would go to all this trouble just to let us extinguish ourselves. So somehow, even if we came to some nuclear war where we have the potential to destroy everything on the planet, I don't think that he'll allow this to happen. Although, 2/3 of the people could be killed and we'd have to start over or something. But I think we have to be prepared for every inevitability, and God knows we need to start some things over already. The dreadful has already happened. We don't even need nuclear war or some huge calamity like a coronal mass ejection or a meteor hitting the planet or something, wipe half of us out, for us to be aware we're already living in a disaster. And that with depression having covered the earth, as Baha'u'llah predicted, and all the governments would change, and we've got the trend going away from unity, both on the grand scale and on smaller scale. So I think Baha'is feel a special privilege and responsibility to carry the message of unity, and to find ways in which we can begin to educate ourselves about who we are as human beings, and to use not only the revelation but science to overcome ourselves. The Guardian characterized, Shoghi Effendi characterized this evolution of society towards the world civilization, the one that Baha'u'llah envisioned, as including the refinement of the human brain. In some ways, our own biology is working against us, but the culture is actually more against us than the biology. Our science and our knowledge of human evolution and biology, particularly this area where we're talking about understanding the subconscious and how decisions are being made for us in the subterranean area of our brain. We have to understand that culture has not caught up with what we actually know about ourselves. We actually do know that we are one species, but the conversations out there and the way the theories that are affecting our politics and everything else are still grounded in centuries old prejudices. First of all, based on this fundamental principle of us and them. We're living in a crisis of identity. The House of Justice said in the January 2019 letter, crisis of identity of us and them. And so the work of bringing people to understand who they are first is going to be a greater challenge with adults in terms of transformative education, primarily because adults have to take this on for themselves and be ready to do the self-examination and find that in their self-interest, aside from, all the efforts, material efforts to and goals they have for what they think is in their self-interest. So, easier, informative education. That's going to have to be for another topic. And I'll promise to get a PowerPoint that can show some of this more graphically. I just didn't have time because of the medical emergency in our family to get that together. I'd like to end, however, with a presentation that's complete, that reveals or shows some beautiful slides from the different world religions and showing how religion has been progressive. If there's time, we could go through that. I'll try to pull that up now. Let's see. I have to stop the screen sharing for a minute.
It's already stopped. You should just be able to hit the share screen button and pull it back up.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we really appreciate that you were able to join us today, and more importantly, we hope you can provide your other presentations here. We really appreciate the work you've done and the time and effort, obviously the time, but all the beautiful content, and we hope that we can continue to share more of this subject with people who are desiring to learn more.
I'd be happy to try to come back and do a better job as a presenter. I feel like these Baha'is who tell their story of how they became a Baha'i, and you just see a talking head there for half an hour. But hopefully, listening in some ways, meditation, that visuals are sometimes a distraction from. So we've got all these divisions within humanity. And the teachers of great wisdom and virtue came to all people. Some came with a book and some without. The Baha'u'llah says there were many manifestations of God we don't even know about. And I had a chance to work with Robert Mueller, former Undersecretary General of the United Nations. And we were at The Hague together, and he actually asked me to introduce the youth from Columbine High School who had come to meet the United Nations of Youth. He asked me to introduce them, and I wound up on 48 hours with them. But this great statement of his, I think, is this the ultimate conclusion people have to come to with respect to the division created by religion. And so this is one way to look at the unity among religion. From a Baha'i standpoint, I have a feeling that we have to begin to use science more in understanding not only the science of becoming, but the psychology of our own faith. So let's just take a look at where we are. Man is the macrocosm because all the secrets of existence are revealed in him. Bad science has reinforced the divisions of thinking there are multiple races. It's a false perception that we're different peoples, different races, when in fact science has now proved that we're all one people, one human race. This was presented in China. So it's an interesting, the oldest religious text on the planet, I believe, is the I Ching, the Zhou Yi. And one of the sections translated from the Chinese says that the divine does not manifest itself apart from man, and the supreme revelation of God appears in prophets, and to venerate them is true veneration of God. So we're going to look at these prophets. The idea of a messenger of God is that the creative principle sends these great beings who appear once in about 1,000 years as a reflection of his own reality and bringing the Spirit of God and these attributes of God to the world of humanities in a visible way that we can see. They serve as mediators between God and man, and therefore to venerate them is to venerate God. Baha'i concept of God is that God is an unknowable essence, unknowable in his essence, knowable through his attributes, particularly as they are reflected in these great world teachers. One of the early religions, Tao Te Ching, describes God in a similar way. It says there's a thing formless yet complete. Before heaven and earth existed, without sound, without substance, it stands alone and unchanging. It is all-pervading and unfailing. One may think of it as the mother of all beneath heaven. We do not know its name, but we call it Tao. Baha'is accept the idea that religion must agree with science and reason, or it becomes superstition. And if it becomes the cause of disharmony, it'd be better not to exist. Conversely, science without religion can become destructive. Science without the moral force of religion and spiritual values can lose its ethical compass. I digress for a second and tell a personal story. I first became a peace activist when my uncle came to visit us one summer. The atomic bomb, the first atomic bomb, was exploded on my birthday, July the 16th, 3 years before I was born. Exactly 19 years later, in the summer, July, my uncle Harvey came to stay with us one summer and get his pilot's license. And he was the principal scientist. He was the 23rd scientist recruited to the Manhattan Project to build the bomb. And he was principal investigator for isolating plutonium, which the second bomb dropped on Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb. The one on Hiroshima was a uranium bomb. And he became a peacenik, a peace activist. And when he came to visit me, he looked like a hippie this was, in oh gosh, probably 64, 65, some almost 20 years after the war. He had supported Oppenheimer and together worked for the idea of establishing an international regulatory commission to control or contain this technology, this weaponry. And it was really a possible step towards an international government. And it was killed by the American political system. It almost passed, but we might have had a world government by now. Actually, Oppenheimer and my uncle said they thought that this bomb would end all wars. They didn't even think it'd be used. The politicians the one decided to blow things up. Truman, but he was surprised, shocked, and disheartened by what happened with the thing he had helped to invent, to create. So I relate to this in a very personal way. If a thing carried excess, it'll prove to be a source of evil. And there's some quotes from the writings about how science can be used inappropriately, even how civilization, if carried to excess, can be harmful. Baha'i wrote that strange and astonishing things exist in the earth, but they're hidden from the minds and understanding of men. An infernal engine hath been devised and hath proved so cruel a weapon of destruction that it is like none that ever witnessed or heard. These things are capable of changing the whole atmosphere of the earth, and their contamination would prove lethal. Baha'u'llah knew about this. Good scientific knowledge is empirical, verifiable, predictive, and replicatable. And revelation, on the other hand, is not so objective. In terms of your own experience of the divine, for example, it's subjective. And I want to digress just for a second to reflect on a passage in the writings that's in Baha'i World Faith called Subjective Faith, that there's an effect on civilization when the revelation comes that's in a book, it's objective. And the other is essentially transmitted into the consciousness of everyone, unbeknownst to them. And a transformation occurs as a wave of civilization that results from the impulse released by the revelation. It affects everybody and changes everything. And it's people don't know its source. This kind of knowledge is released into the minds of human beings, partly as scientific information. But that's another topic. We'll go into that in quite detail. The Baha'i message is that the reality of all the divine religions is one. All the prophets are united in their message. They simply ascend from different points on the horizon. Every ancient prophet gave glad tidings of the future, and every future has accepted the past. All the divine religions proceed from one source, in other ways, one light, but they differ from one another is due to the exigencies of the age in which they appeared. Know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other? That last side is from a hidden word number 68, and it's followed by a section, a verse that gives us the clue or the key for how to find a proper education, I believe. He says, ponder in your hearts at all times how you were created, that you're all created from the same dust, that we're all part of the same process of evolution. We have these iconic drawings of these great world teachers and prophets and sages with halo around them. So Carl Jung would refer to these as archetypes of some of the same principles. This principle, for example, the Chinese yin-yang, yin-yang principle, is illustrative of two things. It's the unity of opposites, or duality, such that the parts can only be understood in terms of their counterpart or opposite and inside the context of the whole. This symbol exists in every culture, which Carl Jung would say is an archetype. There's a wonderful quote from Baha'u'llah that directly addresses one of the questions being asked by modern physicists. He says, the world of existence came into being through the heat generated from the interaction between the active force and that which is its recipient. These two are the same, and yet they are different. And it's illustrating this, again, this ancient principle. Baha'u'llah said, thus doth the great announcement inform thee about this glorious structure. Out of stillness, motion has been created. Baha'u'llah wrote, behold how in this day the beginning is reflected in the end, and how out of stillness motion hath been engendered. This motion hath been generated by the potent energies which the words of the Almighty have released throughout the entire creation. The manifestations of his divine glory have been sent down from time immemorial and have been commissioned to summon mankind to the one true God. That the names of some of them are forgotten and the records of their lives are lost is to be attributed to the disturbances and changes that have overtaken the world. The names of some of them are lost. Well, I want to refer to one that I found. Quetzalcoatl, the Toltec civilization. You've probably heard of Teotihuacan, which is outside Mexico City, where the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon are. There's that symbol, by the way, of the yin yang that's in China. You find it in Mesoamerica. It's again this principle of duality. So even on the Greek temples, Quetzalcoatl was to Mesoamerica what Christ is to Europe, the center of a religious cosmology and preeminent symbol of their religion. Both Christ and Quetzalcoatl were considered to be men who ascended into heaven upon their death. Christ to sit at the right hand of God, Quetzalcoatl to become the morning star. Both were tempted by evil powers, and both were prophesied to one day return to earth. This is the city of the sacred, well, it's the home where this Toltec ruler lived. And you'll be able to see, I think, the pyramids in a minute. In this book, I found this book at the museum there. I was not yet a Baha'i when I went there, and I went and sat on top of the Pyramid of the Sun all day one day and read the Bhagavad Gita. But this book, if you look in it, I think there's a codex in this book. There's Tezcatlipoca, the enemy. See if I can find it. That's the Pyramid of the Moon, Street of the Dead, plaza in front of the Temple of the Moon. Pyramid of the Sun is over there on the left. Get a sense of how big it is. Hope you visit there sometime if you haven't been. In the book, in the codices that are carved on the walls, there's a picture of Quetzalcoatl being commissioned to be sent to the earth with a scepter of the ruler and the lawgiver, and being sent down a ladder to the peoples of the earth. It's a very clear archetypal motif of the idea of a mediator or messenger. Anyway, there's an entire culture built around him, and he was persecuted, banished, and vowed to return. Each great religious teacher is the founder of a great tradition, and civilization and culture result from his teachings, recorded in a text or books, and often reflected in the world's great art and literature. So I'm going to show you some of that from each of these different revealers. In Hinduism, for example, we have these oral traditions from as far back as 8,000 years before Christ. The Upanishads, the most favorite Bible is the Bhagavad Gita, which is a part of the Mahabharata. And it's incredible because it has a passage in there. I think I can quote it. It's probably here. I'll try to find it. If you look closely enough at the Upanishads and in the Hindu scriptures, there's a supreme being. The idea of multiple gods arose from these different heroes and saints who reflected the different attributes of God. This is some pictures I took in Africa of a Hindu temple. You can see that iconic symbol of sacredness, this halo of light around his head. Here's a Hindu painting of Jesus as the avatar, again, messenger. Here's the quote I wanted to read from Bhagavad Gita. I think it's the most wonderful quote in Hinduism. Whenever there's a decline of righteousness and unrighteousness is in the ascendant, then I body myself forth. I can't see part of it. For the protection of the virtuous, for the destruction of evil amongst men, and for the establishing of righteousness, I am born from age to age. So this is the idea of progressive revelation expressed in the Hindu sacred book. The idea of return and the return of the messenger, the Christ spirit. Of course, we have the Buddha with his Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, one of which, by the way, is right thinking. Again, purity of thought. Oh, I love this. Tathagata is the essence, which is the reality of matter, but he is not matter. He is the essence, which is the reality of sensation, but he is not sensation. He is the essence, which is the reality of intellect, but he is not intellect. This is part of what we might think of as the Buddhist koan exercises, where you can learn to transcend conceptual thought, partly by tricking the mind out of itself through illogical propositions and contradictions. The sound of one hand clapping is the real classic one. But the idea being that the mind cannot know itself while it's engaged in the conceptual thought. It's like a dog chasing its tail. In the Bible, it says, "Be still and know that I am God." You have to quiet the mind through meditation in order to sense the divine within. The Tathagata is the essence, which is the reality of motivation, but he's not motivation. He's the essence, which is the reality of consciousness, yet he is not consciousness, the element of space, but does not abide in any four of the elements. Transcending the scope of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, he is not produced in the sixth sense media. He abides in ultimate reality, yet there is no relationship between it and him. Tathagata is not produced from causes, nor does he depend upon conditions. He is not without any characteristic, nor has he any characteristic. He has no single nature, nor diversity of natures. And he goes on. He's neither that shore, nor this shore, here between, or there, anywhere. So it's trying to enable the mind to get beyond this duality and experience oneness with the greater mind. Almost all depictions of the great prophets are with these halos of light. The universal Buddha, fifth Buddha, who's prophesied to return and unite humanity, Maitreya, is Baha'u'llah. Baha'is believe that this prophecy concerning the fifth Buddha is fulfilled by Baha'u'llah. I'm not the first Buddha to come upon the earth, nor shall I be the last. In due time, another Buddha will arise. He will reveal to you the same eternal truths which I have taught you. He will proclaim the great religious life, wholly perfect and pure, such as I now proclaim. Then we have the prophet Zoroaster.
Dr. Watson, we really appreciate this and we want to move forward, but in the interest of time,
Yep.
we have started running over, and just to finish the thought, we left it so we can pick up here next time. Hopefully we can do that. Perhaps we can schedule within the next few weeks to continue part 2.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah, we would greatly appreciate it because a lot of people don't know about Zoroaster, and this subject alone will be very enlightening to a great many people.
His being based within the Judeo-Christian tradition is interesting, how connected he is and how his religion is referred to in the Bible.
Yes, and most people don't even know that. So I think it'll be very, very enlightening to have people learn about Zoroaster, learn about the fundamentals of how Zoroaster's relevance really applies to world religion, the stage at large. With that being said, we want to thank you for, and all of you who have joined us here today, for joining us and discussing this subject with us. We have, of course, some questions that were not answered because we didn't have time to ask. So Olga, I see you have your question. We're going to try to get it responded to next time. And this could be a good question to end off on for people to think about. The question is the purpose of education to master your inner self? That's a good question. That being said, we thank everyone for having joined us. And most importantly, Dr. Watson, thank you for bringing this presentation. It's beautiful. We really appreciate it. And again, we look forward to starting part 2 of this presentation and, of course, the other subjects that you have to share. We would love to learn more about the ANISA program. Of course, ANISA program, it's something that we have some materials on, but nothing beats having a real live representative to talk about it. And today, not from several years ago. So again, thank you, Dr. Watson. We really appreciate all you've done, and everyone for joining. Happy Sunday, and enjoy your evening as well.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. And again, I look forward to seeing you all.